September 15, 1978, Pedro Avilés Perez drove back to Culiacán with his chauffeur, unaware that an ominous presence was trailing him. As they left the depraved doper party hosted at a ranch in Sinaloa, the white pickup's headlights pierced through the early morning darkness and revealed a police roadblock tailing him. Avilés assumed that the armed troops were there for his protection, but something sinister lurked beneath the surface, something that ultimately led to his death. The official report claimed that Avilés attempted to run the roadblock and was gunned down. However, American investigators raised an eyebrow at that account, believing that Avilés was brutally ambushed in the shadows. But who was Pedro Avilés Perez, and what did his death signify? Was it merely a violent end to a notorious drug lord, or did it mark the beginning of a new era of cartel violence and bloodshed? He was also known for his connections to Felix Gallardo, a corrupt police officer who acted as his personal bodyguard and helped him broker deals. Pedro Avilés Perez, also known as El León de la Sierra, was a man shrouded in legend, a symbol of the violent underworld of drug smuggling. He is considered the first generation of major Mexican drug smugglers of marijuana, and was also the first to use aircrafts to smuggle drugs into the United States. His top lieutenants, Rafael Caro Quintero and Ernesto Fonseca Carrillo, learned everything they could from him, watching his every move. They were an exceptional group, raised in the fertile doper soil of Sinaloa on Mexico's northern Pacific coast. Avilés' organization had risen to unparalleled heights by the mid-70s, with extensive cooperation between Mexican and U.S. law enforcement. However, Avilés had a particular fondness for Miguel Ángel Félix Gallardo, a corrupt police officer acting as a bodyguard and helping him conduct illicit transactions. But with power came a dangerous vulnerability, and as Avilés rose to the top, so did his enemies. The pressure from American officials was mounting, and Avilés began to be viewed as a liability by both the Mexican feds and his own lieutenants. When Avilés was ambushed and killed, it left a vacuum in leadership that each of his lieutenants quickly moved in to fill. Whispers in the underworld suggest that Avilés' demise was not merely the result of cooperation between Mexican and U.S. enforcement, but a meticulously planned execution by his own trusted lieutenants, Caro Quintero and Fonseca Carrillo, in collusion with the corrupt police officer Felix Gallardo. With Avilés out of the way, Quintero and Carrillo quickly seized the opportunity to take over the drug trafficking routes, solidifying their own empire. And shortly thereafter, Gallardo resigned from his job to join forces with them. And this is really when the infamous Guadalajara Cartel came together, a name used to strike fear into the hearts of many, with unparalleled size and reach. This drug enterprise was unlike any other cartel that had previously emerged from Mexico.
It was a group of Mexican drug traffickers saying, okay, let's share our resources.
Their number one rule was simple. To cross them was to invite certain death, and the people of Mexico lived in fear of their power for over a decade. In its prime, the Guadalajara Cartel stood as the sole drug trafficking organization in Mexico, boasting a corruption network that spread like a deadly virus, infecting every corner of the country. Rafael Caro Quintero and Ernesto Fonseca Carrillo were formidable, but they couldn't have built an empire without the mastermind behind it all, Miguel Ángel Félix Gallardo. He was the glue that held the cartel together, and the strategist who united Mexico's narcos like never before. And while Quintero and Carrillo focused on production, Gallardo masterminded the entire operation. And so it wasn't long before he was given the name El Padrino, the Godfather. At first, the Guadalajara Cartel dealt in marijuana and was the first to introduce ensamilla to the Mexican drug market, which is a type of seedless marijuana that was in high demand in the U.S. And so the cartel found itself at the forefront of a booming new industry, raking in unimaginable wealth and power. However, they soon realized that the real money was in cocaine. Gallardo brokered a working relationship between the Mexican trafficking organizations and their Colombian counterparts, especially those in the Cali cartel. The partnership exploded, with the DEA estimating that 50% of the cocaine shipped by Colombian organized crime groups towards the United States transited through Mexico. The cartel's profits soared, and they were lulled into a false sense of invincibility. They believed their limitless cash would protect them from all and everything, but they were wrong. With power comes risk, and the cartel soon found itself facing a new set of challenges in the form of increased scrutiny from law enforcement, especially the American DEA agents. And yet the cartel's grip on the drug trade remained firm, as they trafficked multi-ton shipments of cocaine and marijuana each month. But little did they know that their reign of terror would come to an abrupt end, because of one fateful decision that would later turn out to be their biggest mistake. What's that, you ask? The answer lies ahead. The downfall looms. Deep in the heart of Chihuahua was a vast 2,500-acre marijuana plantation site called Rancho Buffalo, which was a thriving operation by the notorious Guadalajara Cartel under the protection of the corrupt DFS, which was the Mexican intelligence agency. With barracks for 7,000 workers, state-of-the-art irrigation systems, and warehouses for processing and storage, the massive operation produced billions of dollars per year in revenue. Of course, one would think that such a well-guarded and lucrative operation would remain shrouded in secrecy, protected by endless layers of bribes and corrupt alliances. But as it turned out, the mighty cartel's efforts to safeguard their illicit empire were nothing but a futile attempt to ward off the inevitable. As the DEA gained momentum in their investigations of the Guadalajara Cartel, Agent Kiki Camarena, with the help of Mexican pilot Alfredo Zavala Avelar, eventually managed to uncover the location of the massive plantation site. November 14, 1984. It marked a day for the Guadalajara Cartel as the Mexican army, with the aid of the DEA, launched a massive operation to burn Rancho Buffalo to the ground. The raid resulted in the total destruction of over 5,000 metric tons of marijuana worth a staggering $2.5 billion, making the Rancho Buffalo raid the DEA's largest drug seizure. And it was also a devastating blow to the cartel, who began to realize for the first time that maybe they weren't totally invincible. The DEA had not only humiliated them, but their once unshakable grip on the drug trade was now slipping through their fingers. And as the kingpins licked their wounds, a dark and ominous rage began to fester within them, and they went out for blood, thirsting for revenge against those who dared to cross them. But the question was, how far were the drug lords willing to go? And who exactly was going to pay the price? Unfortunately, in this game of power, the lines between DEA agents and innocent Americans completely blurred, leading to tragic consequences. A is for American and assassination. In search of a better life and a chance to spread their faith, 4 American Jehovah's Witnesses embarked on a journey to the heart of Mexico, only to find themselves unwittingly caught in the crosshairs of the most dangerous cartel in Mexico. Benjamin Mascarenas, a man of Catholic heritage, found a new spiritual calling as a Jehovah's Witness and met his wife Pat during church activities. They toiled away as janitors in Reno, Nevada, before deciding to leave this mundane life behind to house sit for a wealthy acquaintance in Guadalajara. After the young couple settled down, they asked their friends Dennis and Rose Carlson, who lived in California and were also Jehovah's Witnesses, to join them. They all believed that in Mexico they could have a better life, and that it was the perfect place for them to preach their faith. However, they had no idea their quest would end in a horrifying nightmare. December 2nd, 1984. It was supposed to be just another warm winter morning in Guadalajara, but for the 2 young American couples, it was going to be their last. On that morning, the 4 friends, dressed in their Sunday best, went knocking on doors in the city's upper-middle-class neighborhood of Chapalita, handing out pamphlets and talking to anyone interested in knowing more about their faith. Around 9 a.m., they stopped at a luxurious-looking home and knocked on its door, then stood outside with smiles decorating their faces, oblivious to the dark and ominous fate that awaited them. Unbeknownst to them, the house they knocked on belonged to none other than Fonseca Carrillo. And with that, their fate was sealed, for they soon would disappear without a trace. For years, the mystery of the disappearance of those 4 Americans haunted their loved ones, and it wasn't until 3 former Mexican state police officers came forward with a horrifying revelation in 2018 that the truth was finally uncovered. Ramon Lira, Rene Lopez, and Jorge Godot didn't start out on the wrong side of the law. They were once loyal police officers in Mexico who had joined the force because they wanted to protect and serve, But their lives took a dark turn when they were officially assigned by their supervisors to work as bodyguards for the infamous Guadalajara drug cartel. Initially, they were told that they were protecting DFS members, but it didn't take long for them to learn the truth. The corruption ran so deep that the three drug lords were actually given real credentials by the DFS, and so the three men found themselves trapped in a dangerous web of corruption, fear, and violence with no escape in sight, knowing that merely saying no would result in a swift and violent death for them and their loved ones. But in 2018, these men came forward, revealing the truth to U.S. authorities. Fueled by fear and guilt, they told their harrowing stories about the brutal and unforgiving world of the cartel. They spoke of their involvement in kidnappings, murders, and other violent crimes on behalf of the cartel, and they revealed what really took place that winter morning in December 1984. Carrillo's son-in-law peeked out the window and saw the four witnesses waiting outside. He heard them talking and figured they were Americans. So he hurried to Carrillo and told him about the situation, and he suspected that they were undercover DEA agents. At the time, the three officers were present at the house, and Carrillo gave an order: get them. When no one answered the door, the couples had already started walking away and separated from each other. Carrillo's men targeted the women first and forcibly took them away in a car. The husbands, witnessing the violent abduction of their wives, didn't resist when they too were kidnapped by the same assailants. They were taken back to Carrillo's house, tied and interrogated by Rene, the bodyguard police officer. He said he talked to them softly. They told them they weren't DEA and that they were nothing but missionaries preaching the word of God. Rene believed him, but at that time, Carrillo's paranoia was out of control. He ordered for them to be hauled out of his house and into a small apartment he owned. There, they tried to break free, but were beaten into submission. The situation for the kidnapped Jehovah's Witnesses continued to be grim as they were taken to a ranch outside the city. The men were placed in horse stalls, while the women were confined to a bedroom. The captors removed all the victims' clothes to prevent any other escape attempts. The fear of what was to come next hung heavy in the air as they awaited their fate. To make matters even worse, they were interrogated at the ranch by the hands of none other than Joaquin Guzman, better known as El Chapo, who had been mentored by Felix Gallardo and would later ascend the ranks to become the notorious drug lord he's known as today. According to the three officers, El Chapo had a penchant for blood and enjoyed inflicting pain and suffering on his victims during interrogations, so he subjected the four witnesses to all kinds of physical and psychological abuse. The men and women were put in a room together, and El Chapo ordered his men to assault the women in front of their husbands. Dennis, a vet from Vietnam, started fighting back, but his bravery did nothing but leave him all black and blue. Finally, when El Chapo satisfied his sadistic streak, he ordered his men to dig a large hole in the ground. The Jehovah's Witnesses were all taken out of the house one by one and brought to stand in front of the grave. He enjoyed watching them beg for their lives before shooting each one of them in the head and dumping their bodies in the grave, where their bodies remain to this day, buried deep as they've never been found. The cartel's thirst for revenge had no end, resulting in the murders of two more Americans weeks later, also mistaken for DEA. In addition to the kidnapping, torturing, and brutal murder of a real DEA agent, Kiki Camarena, would turn out later to be their biggest mistake. The US government implemented a massive operation to deal with the fallout from Kiki's murder, with the sole goal of bringing those responsible for his murder to justice at all costs. Felix Gallardo, Caro Quintero, and Fonseca Carrillo were ultimately caught and brought to justice, each given a 40-year prison sentence for their involvement in the kidnapping and murder of Camarena. Investigators from the U.S. suspect that the bodies of the four Jehovah's Witnesses were buried in the same Guadalajara park where Camarena was initially buried. And who knows how many more bodies lie there, buried 6 feet under, serving as a chilling reminder of the cartel's ruthless power and their unquenchable thirst for revenge.